participants. Welcome to our task force meeting which is actually now a research webinar and part of the GFCE research webinar series. I welcome you all. Today's topic is putting cyber norms in practice, implementing the UN GG 2015 recommendations through national strategies and policies, and the presentation of this report. And we are very glad to have a very distinguished panel here today. Just as an introduction, this is an academic research report that was commissioned by the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise as part of the Global Cyber Capacity Building Research Agenda 2021. The project was sponsored by the United Kingdom Foreign and Development Office, and the research was conducted by Eneken, Tikk, and Mika Kerttunen. Through this research agenda mechanism, the GFC aims to identify and address knowledge gaps relevant to ongoing GFC work and members' capacity building activities. And the topic was identified in 2020 by our task force, so the task force on CBM's norms and cyber diplomacy. We are very excited to hear about it. I'm also very excited to be able to welcome Kathryn Jones, Head of International Cyber Governance at the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, who will be in lead today and who will be moderating this session. Kat, so good to see you, and thank you for doing this today. And with that, I would like to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sylvia, for such a warm welcome. I'm really delighted to be moderating this event hosted by the GFCE. So welcome to our audience, to our panelists, and importantly to our authors. Thank you for joining us for what I hope will be a really insightful session, launching this really important and worthwhile report, which I highly recommend you read. So as Sylvia mentioned, our session is going to include a presentation of the findings of the report by the authors themselves, a discussion between some of the eminent panelists that we have today in this area, and as well as a question and answer session with you, the audience. So please do have your questions ready for that and put them in the chat. But to set the scene, before I hand over to our experts, I will touch on the significance of this report in the international context. But before even I do that, I want to start by commending all those involved in the process that brought us to this launch event for this important report. The GFCE continues to lead the way in supporting states to develop their cybersecurity capacity. And particularly close to my own heart is their work supporting states to engage and participate in what we call cyber diplomacy, the art of international relations on cybersecurity and technology issues. Nowadays, cybersecurity is addressed in many international fora, but a particularly long-standing and well-known negotiation is that which started in the first committee of the United Nations in 1998. It was following this debate that the GFCE identified this knowledge gap regarding national implementation of the UN cyber norms. So, as some of you will know, the GFCE uses its global cyber capacity building research agenda process to identify and address knowledge gaps which are relevant to the ongoing work of the organisation and to members' capacity building. And it was through that process that this report was commissioned with support from my own organisation, the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. So before we turn to our authors to hear about this report, which is I'm sure what you're all here for, I wanted to just explain a little bit about why the UK and our GFC partners think that this topic is really important. What's it all about, and why do we need this report? For those of you who don't follow it closely, which I think is the majority of the world, to be fair, in 2015, the UN Group of Governmental Experts, or GGE as we call it, agreed an initial framework for advancing responsible state behaviour in cyberspace. And that framework is made up of international law, voluntary and non-binding norms, and confidence building measures which are underpinned by capacity building. The 11 norms of responsible state behaviour that are detailed in that report were adopted by consensus in the General Assembly along with the rest of the framework. And that was because all member states could see the urgent need for a framework that set out how states should behave in cyberspace in order to promote stability and security in that environment and beyond. The framework, including its norms, has since been endorsed by and discussed by subsequent UN groups, but also by many groups beyond the UN who see the importance of this work. But of course, the world has changed since 2015. The digital world has continued its exponential growth and development, and more states have come to understand both the opportunities and challenges that it poses, including at the political level. So in the 2019 to 2021 cyber sessions at the UN, in both the GGE and the open-ended working group, the OEWG, we promoted the existing framework to those who might not have been familiar with it or even aware of its existence. Of course, in this context, knowledge is nothing without implementation. A framework is very nice, but does it mean anything if you're not actually using it? We need everyone to implement the framework so that we can all benefit from the security and stability that it supports. But the question remained, what did that implementation look like and how would we go about it? And that's the task force identified this particular crucial question as our shared knowledge gap. There was no guide for implementing the norms. We could look to our partners and our experts for inspiration, for guidance, for best practice, but that information wasn't collated and readily available in one accessible format. In May 2021, the GGE again successfully agreed a consensus report, which importantly added an additional layer of guidance, seeking to explain why the norms had been written as they had, how they were to be interpreted, and addressed implementation. But word limit restrictions on UN reports unfortunately limit the level of detail they can cover. That guidance published in 2021 is of course reflected in this report that we're looking at today, and we hope supported by it. So our authors are going to explain how they drew this report together. So let's now turn to them to hear all about this exciting work. So we have Mika, Kerttunen and Eneken, Tikk, who are the director and executive producer of the Cyber Policy Institute, as well as distinguished academics in their own right. They've contributed to various cyber norms processes, including the 2013, 2015 and 2017 UN GGEs, the UNIDIR cyber norms discussions, and MIT cyber norms conferences. And we're really delighted to have them with us today to launch this report. So Mika, I think over to you.
Thank you, Kat. First of all, thank you for the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office for sponsoring, commissioning and actually asking the question of norms implementation, as well as the GFCE allowing us to do the work in question. Thanks Kathleen and Kathryn and Sylvia for hosting, facilitating and making this event available, as well as our friends in the panel and our friends in the audience. Welcome. I'll put a short presentation on so that you have some visual memory of the issue. Now, Eneken and I, we have two angles here. We look things from a global, or let's say universal, this UN GGE perspective, but also from national perspective, national strategies, policies, legislation perspective. And then the other one is that we combine this law and policy angles. So where are we? As Kat explained, the norms saw light in the 2014-15 UN GGE with 11 recommendations for this voluntary non-binding norms, rules or principles of responsible behavior of states. Later last year, both the UN GGE and the open-ended working group reaffirmed, welcomed, concluded the usefulness of these norms, but actual guidance on implementation has not been offered. As mentioned, 2021 UN GFCE opened the door in that direction, and it was also very beneficial for us. Here's an image from Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which we also used in the report with the kind permission, giving a snapshot of the norms. The green color illustrates this, let's say, more encouraging norms, and the red one, 3 more restrictive ones, do not or should not norms. But there hasn't been no explicit and uttered implementation of these norms by any state so far, and this I mean that a state or a government determinately utters that we are going to implement this norm this way or that way. But the question is that actually needed? Because, and this is now our presumption, but also what we consider a fact, that norms implementation requires some level of capacity or building capacity. And as we have become aware through our work and through our friends of the action taken by many states, for example, 108 countries having issued a cyber or information security strategy, doctrine, master plan, concept, or you name it, taking action. And we started to look from this norms perspective, operationalizing the norms, what in state activities, real activities, uttered activities, planned activities is something that actually supports these norms, go in line in the intention and the very meaning of the norms. While doing this, we of course noticed that there are several lines of action, and these happy arrows here now can symbolize different governmental departments, ministries, agencies, but also like areas of action, technical, diplomatic, educational, doctrinal, and you name it. So we started to see that there are many ways, or there need to be many ways to implement the norm, that there is no actual like a one shoe or silver bullet to do the job, to reach the very intention of these norms. So in the report, this goes now to the structure and the logic of it. We repeated 11 times this box in the box. We went through GFCE 2021 guidance on respective norms. We squeezed out 3 elements of implementation, operationalized the norm into sort of a core pieces. That is now, of course, our interpretation. We made for each norm a particular close-up of some country activities, 1 page, 2 page close-up what they are doing, which in our mind supports this norm, regardless that they have that government has not explicitly been thinking of these norms, and some of these activities precede these norms as well, but it is in the line of this direction. We have provided the readers and governments, agencies, experts, further examples of implementation from total 46 countries and 7 international or regional organizations of various kinds. We could have taken another 46 countries there, because there's a lot that countries have done. What we are emphasizing, that it could be systematized or taken a little bit further. And therefore, there are these considerations for practice per each norm or recommendation. And then there is a general procedural guidance following that examination. So the logic here is that, for example, if now this blue squares now represent sort of a deepening angle that the light blue, for example, establishing a capacity in a country, that mid dark blue is widening the operation of that capacity, including multi-stakeholder in one country. The dark blue then taking that endeavor regionally or globally wide. And then these other colors represent the individual task, for example, establishing a lexicon, establishing some criteria, education, and so on. So there is a logic of deepening, widening, but also doing some particular measures that, in our opinion, strengthen these norms. So our findings is that this is not only for this framework of responsible state behavior. Implementing these norms strengthen national cybersecurity, and that is not a insignificant bonus of doing it. There's a low threshold of starting to implement. Our view is that it could be enhanced and put more systematically. We want to encourage countries not to reinvent wheels, but using existing procedures, and especially for a policy geek like me, national cyber and information security policy and strategy processes are the key. Our conviction is that by establishing, thickening, and widening these norms work, we actually are constituting these voluntary non-binding norms into practices that are more enduring, and no country can have double standards. So they become like a sediment of international and national action. And finally, a couple of pedagogical moves, encouragement for countries and agencies: adopt a norm. Pick up a norm that is relevant for your country, agency, your ambitions, and become a local, regional, or even global champion of that. And finally, the problem with these three restrictive norms is that how do you implement something that you are not doing? Well, one way of implementing is giving these pledges that it's not our behavior to target computer emergency response or emergency teams and organizations. It's not our behavior to target critical infrastructure in our countries. It doesn't cost a thing. We think it's worth the effort. So thank you for your support, all our supporters and friends and colleagues around the globe. Without you, this report would have never seen the light of the day. Over to you, Kat.
Thank you, Mika. That's excellent. A great introduction there to what is really a fantastic resource of a report. So thank you both for putting it together and for talking to us about it today. I'd like to introduce our panelists now, who are going to share some views on the topics covered in this report. We have several eminent panelists with us today. We have Benjamin Ang, who is a Senior Fellow and Deputy Head of the Centre of Excellence for National Security at RSIS in Singapore. Welcome, Benjamin. We also have, and I learned how to pronounce his name correctly before the recording, Helio Sant'Ana, who is International Affairs Advisor at the President's Offices in Brazil. And welcome, Helio, really great to see you today. We have, of course, Eneken and Tikk, who I've already introduced, will be commenting on our panel as well. And we have I actually see you, Moliehi. Ah, there we are. We have Moliehi Makumane, who is a researcher with UNIDIR Security and Technology Programme, but was previously involved in these negotiations that we've been mentioning today at the UN. So some really fascinating topics to cover here. So I'm going to start with a question perhaps to Moliehi, and then maybe Eneken can join as well on this one. Why is it so important that we support states to implement these norms? What is the effect of states implementing these norms, particularly on international peace and security in cyberspace? Could you give us a flavour for that, Moliehi?
Thank you so much, Kat, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited to be joining so many familiar faces on this discussion. I think supporting states on norms implementation is supporting what they themselves have called a political commitment that can, guide their own conduct in cyberspace. And I think any effort to support a political commitment that member states have themselves committed to is a very important endeavor. And the more we do develop and implement those initiatives that support that endeavor, I think what we're going to see is quite practically that the idea of norms implementation is not just going to be something rhetorical, that member states say, but is going to actually become part and parcel of member states' foreign policy, and is going to become part of the broader diplomacy and not, just a specialized type of cyber diplomacy, but it's just going to be part of normal member state diplomacy. And I think practically, if for no other reason, to be supporting initiatives that support that kind of development in this area that's not going anywhere anytime soon, but it will only grow, is worth us supporting those initiatives. But I think the second one is through implementing these norms, member states are also going to get a chance to identify gaps in their domestic frameworks, which is something that, this particular guidance has really, I think, brought to the fore, probably more than we've done in the past. That domestic element of it, I think, is such an important thing. And through implementation, member states are going to be able to first gauge where they are and then identify if there are gaps. And because they've already made the commitment, develop the measures for that. And like I said in the beginning, any initiative that supports implementation is an initiative that supports also improving that domestic framework competence. And I think that's a very important thing. And that's what I'm hoping that is what member states get out of this type of project.
Thanks, Moliehi. And Eneken, you must have thought that this was an important topic to be looking at, to be doing such a big piece of research. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're hoping to see from the effect of states implementing these norms?
Thank you. And again, really great to see so many familiar faces. I just building on what Moliehi said, I think that one of the benefits of supporting and actively engaging in further norms implementation was to be achieved is different, in a way, bringing together maybe getting a better understanding between different expectations that have gone into what we have presented as different considerations of implementing the same norm. So it doesn't matter where everybody starts. It can be this aspiration as it has been in the UNGG, of improved state of international and global cybersecurity, but it can be directed as support to particular national concerns and aspirations through which we can build this more united front against, for example, certain particular malicious and hostile trends. So in that sense, we could also get a little bit more concrete when we think about what's to be achieved. So some things that we see as priorities to restrain or root out in a certain time frame with some metrics, and then really looking like how this norms package may help us do it. And I also think that there is much synergy to be found in doing this together, doing it in collaboration, in communication, and not just synergies between like-minded, but countries with similar strategic goals or challenges or experience. And therefore, or through this, I think what can be achieved is using the cyber norms platform for managing the tensions and differences that clearly predate and extend the cyber discourse itself, because that's, I think, where we all want to get. Thanks.
Thanks, Eneken. I mean, really good points. That's, why it's so important to manage those tensions, and any tools we have to manage those tensions must be, really high value. So the report highlights that there's a wide range of national approaches, as we mentioned, to implementing the norms from all across the world. And so my question is really, can having such a wide range of approaches to implementation actually make it meaningful? And I think, sometimes we think, we've got an objective, there's one route to do that. So if we're seeing so many different routes, what does that actually mean? I'm going to go back to, perhaps we'll start with Eneken, so you on the screen now, and then we'll go to Benjamin and to Moliehi afterwards. Eneken, please carry on.
Sure. Well, we saw the value in that, and I would say, to me, like these different national efforts all testify to a really fertile ground on which we can achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And on the other hand, these various national efforts can give us further leads to how to tighten our agenda even further. For example, one thing that we've been struggling for several GGs and for several discussions is what could be the meaningful roles in which to bring in the private sector. Like, we can get closer to that discussion by looking at how different countries do it, for example.
Thank you, Eneken. Yes, absolutely. And I think that stakeholder question is one that's really, really live today. Benjamin, perhaps you could share some thoughts.
Thank you, Kathryn, and of course, thank you to Eneken and Mika for inviting me into this. Such a great opportunity to be with this panel. The word meaningful actually is a very meaningful word, because what is a meaningful development? We're not looking for something that is going to be a comprehensive or final or complete implementation, right? But what I think we are seeing here from this document which they've put together is a necessary step. It's meaningful in the sense that we can't go forward without having established what is already there. And it's actually something very meaningful when, as Mika had said earlier, some of these things predate 2015. So what we're doing here is that we're understanding that norms of behavior are not norms that are imposed by 2015. They are norms that are actually coming up from the ground. It's a concept in common law that you don't create the law, you discover it by seeing what is the right thing to do. And if all of these different parts of society or the government have already come up with these ways of doing things or strategies or policies, then in fact, these are the true norms that have been not created by 2015, but recognized by 2015 and brought up to the fore. And so in that sense, yes, I do find it meaningful that we can actually draw these principles out. And of course, as I was chatting with my colleague Eugene, who is on the call as well, whom I credit for a lot of my discussions, it is still too early to tell what the final result is going to be, because for some of these, like the red zone norms, we don't know, because we don't know until somebody actually goes and attack a cert or use their cert to attack somebody. But I think we can say that with these information that we have, we can start to work towards a more universal understanding, or to even understand that there are all these nuances that you've mentioned, that there are different ways to interpret something. Like, for example, we look into this and say, oh, critical infrastructure. Yes, everybody agrees protect critical infrastructure, or don't attack critical infrastructure, but who do you include in critical infrastructure? And we see slight nuances, or even something that could be contentious like human rights. So it's very, very useful to get something like this going and to even see it all in one place, so that we can then start to do the comparisons, draw things together, and to see how countries have not only come up with the idea, but how they've actually used it. So of course, I zoom in into the Singapore example, on the one on considering all information before you do attribution, and the example that was cited, and not just the theory, but how it was put into practice, because it was actually put into practice for an actual breach, a data breach of 1.5 million citizens' personal health information. And the country had to examine all the necessary information and finally made a choice of what to attribute and not attribute at the same time. So that's useful examples for other people to choose whether to follow or not follow. And having examples, I think, also helps when you create a sense of peer, shall I say, pressure, or maybe support, that, oh, look, my peer countries are doing as well. I don't have to exactly follow what the big countries are doing, because we do know that on the big countries, there's a great difference of opinion. But then when we see all the other smaller countries like ourselves, then we realize, yes, there is a diversity and there is room for nuance, and to really develop these norms in a way that can really lead to responsible state behavior in cyberspace.
Thanks, Benjamin. That's really insightful. I mean, I think Moliehi and I have talked before about different contexts that we operated in, the UK and South Africa, and obviously starting from different places. And it can be a bit overwhelming thinking, oh, I need to implement these norms all right now fully and get to the best standard possible. Moliehi, do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
I'll just start exactly where you are, Kat, because I think for me that is one of the bigger contributions that I think this does is, like Eneken said, we don't have to start at the same place, but it's good to see where everyone starts. And because, you know, we now all fully understand that you don't stop with cyber, you know, there isn't a stop point. You start and then you will review and have a second review and a third review, because things are always changing. And to be able to see how different countries starting from different points are doing that, and also how big their aspirations are in this field is something that I think is very helpful for a lot of countries. And I mean, I've sat on the other side of the table where I was the member state saying, we don't start from the same position. There are underlying disparities. And to be able to see also then now written what South Africa has vis-a-vis what other African countries have or other Commonwealth countries is I think, a very necessary step for countries to be able to then see that they are doing something, and it might not be like someone else's, but you are contributing. And I think another thing that I found also very useful when you look at the domestic or the national is a word that, you know, I haven't seen a lot of, but I saw a lot of here when you read the different papers, and that's the one of national interest. You know, like when I came across it, and I actually realized that a lot of countries are looking at this holistically as part of national interest. And I think it's very interesting to be able to see that, and then to see how other countries treat it, and then to be able then to compare, what works, what doesn't work. But I think at the core of it, realizing that this is a national issue and not a sectoral issue, and seeing it demonstrated there through other countries' efforts has been very useful. And, when we talk about the different starting points, I think it was in 2020 when we had the multi-stakeholder dialogues. And one of the questions we considered was, does the fact that different countries are at different positions going to delay, some of the discussions that we're having? Are there countries that are concerned because they've got a certain timeline, and not being on the same page is going to disrupt that? And a very insightful answer came to say, maybe we shouldn't be looking at norms implementation or the framework in terms of setting a standard, but rather establishing common appreciation and more understanding on the issue. We're not trying to reach a target necessarily. The dialogue in itself is already a win. And I think the paper does that in a big way, and also complements so many other initiatives that have already been undertaken by different forums, including UNIDIR, from where I sit on the other side of the table. And I think read together, it really constitutes a meaningful demonstration and contribution.
Thank you, Moliehi, really helpful. I'm going to turn to Helio now, but before I do, just to encourage you to put some questions in the chat. I'm going to weed them in. I have several questions for the panelists, as you might imagine, but please do put any questions you have in the chat, and I'll try and weed those in as we go. Helio, it'd be really great to hear from you what we can be doing to really continue and further and build on this implementation. So a few panelists have mentioned that the report particularly highlights domestic action as well as international and regional cooperation. And of course, there's other sources of best practice, as Moliehi just said, the GGE reports and national guidance and so on. What would you particularly emphasize in this space? What does it look like from your side?
Well, thank you very much, Kathryn and the GFCE for holding this special event, and Mika and Eneken for inviting me for having this such an important discussion. Well, I guess one of the key aspects that everybody has been talking about is that there's no one size fits all and success cases. So many countries have been enterprising different actions on implementing cyber norms, but there's not one success recipe for any reality. By having an updating assessments on domestic cyber approach, I guess countries can measure their maturity, and they can be supported by any maturity model or framework that they rely on. But the most important, the understanding where they actually are. The GGG norms represents that a very stronghold, a point that countries can help to understand and to pursue the maturity of their cyber norms and cyber implementation. And by having the commitment on the topics that the GGA report stands for, I guess the countries can show maturity. But one of the key aspects, as Moliehi already said, is that the collaboration among regional countries and internal agencies can actually help more than just following a map, because eventually each one have their own experience by implementing in their microcosms some kind of regulation or even a basic approach or even a technical approach. So by having a common place to discuss and to learn from different perspectives, It will help multiple and different agencies and regional countries or regional groups, or even in the international community, to understand different landscapes on how to implement frameworks or topics that we have been seeing in the GGE norms. And I do recommend to deep dive in the study by Mika and Eneken, that they can give us a glimpse on how countries are implementing the norms, and gave us a strong code to give our first steps. Many countries are in different maturity steps, and we can learn from each other. The cyber approach, it is a team sport. This is not a lonely game.
Thanks, Helio. Yes, absolutely. And I think particularly the emphasis on the kind of regional partnering collaboration, often we find that states that are regionally close share some context, not necessarily all the same per se, but they do share some contextual factors that make approaches suitable to their area. So I think that's really, really important to bring out. Benjamin, I think you wanted to come on this one as well.
In terms of the collaboration between the countries, I think it's very interesting to note that it's the real thing. As Helio and Moliehi have said already, it's not just coming up with a roadmap, but really drawing out what is already happening. And Mika's also mentioned it at the beginning. It's not to reinvent the wheel. It's to really talk about all the existing work that's already being done in terms of strategies and in terms of policies that are already in practice, which is so much more valuable than trying to persuade a whole bunch of people. And I like Helio's mentioning about it's a team sport, because a lot of times when we look at it, oh, here's an assignment to all you countries. You've got 11 norms to implement. Go implement them. And then you say, how do I implement 11 norms? And now I've got to persuade every government department. Turn it around. It's already being done. You just didn't know what it was called. And thanks to this document, it suddenly becomes much clearer.
That's really true. I think, Benjamin, the way you pitch something to government departments particularly can really make a difference to how things are perceived and taken on board. So really important there. We're going to, we've got a couple of questions and chat going on, so which is great to see. I'm going to come to one of those questions in a second. Before we go there, perhaps Helio, you could just talk briefly about where you see the GFCE role in this. What more can we be doing to further implementation off the back of this report?
Sure. Well, in my personal opinion, and as the study shows, collaboration is very meaningful. We already talked about that. And for the result of implementing cyber frameworks in many countries, we already seen a lot of developments on these aspects. The contribution of the GFCE shows a promising results in many countries and organizations. They must be getting involved in organizations like, I may say, the OES is doing a great job here in the American continent, conducting regional events, as we talked in the last point. By discussing regional points, eventually is more fruitful to gather and to reach common meaning about a specific topic. And the OES has doing many events involving American states by gathering them by their common characteristics. I guess GFCE has doing this in the past. Brazil have been involved with in the past with in some events. But I think that the private sector is missing. I miss private sector in participating with GFCE. And by giving a search in the website and seeking for Brazilian contribution, we have only 11 insights. So I guess we can do more alongside the initiatives that you're conducting worldwide. I think that we must bring the private sector because they have a strong role in the cyber implementing initiatives. not only by helping the government to implement their frameworks, but also actually performing cyber activities like tabletop exercises or helping governments to evolve on their policies. And many countries will benefit by having studies alongside GFCE or even participating on events like this one.
Thanks, Helio. Yes, the stakeholder part, of course, is really relevant to GFCE as one of the few places where states and stakeholders come together on this discussion. And I think that's really important. And you see that in the report as well about how that comes through in how states actually are implementing norms. Mika, you were obviously drafting this report. Perhaps you can take the author's prerogative to give the GFCE a couple of recommendations as well.
Glad to do that. This is one of the questions Eneken and I discussed, and I'll start and Eneken continue. And now I'm not in a position to speak on behalf of the global forum, but I'm happy to give advice. And especially as we have one of the task force leaders, Sylvia, here on the call. So I would say push and pull. So Global Forum can push now these, let's say, workshops, and I would like to underline workshops, not talk shops, that there are organized events where, for example, action plans are drafted, or let's say at least considered, brainstormed, ways to cooperate under the norm 13A. What does it mean? Collect a group of countries or group of experts, agencies together, or for example, a citing to norms, but essential, how to collect funding for these endeavors that support these norms. But then there is also the pull factor, that now countries, governments, agencies, and experts make use of the Global Forum, ask for that kind of advice, ask for these events that really produce something. Eneken.
Well, thanks for smuggling me in. So I would just say, I understand, and we experienced how this research project, politically sensitive, like themes, was not an easy one to pull through, but it would be more even harder to do it in maybe a different setting. So I would encourage the Global Forum to pick up some of the, I think, very serious and hard questions. If we don't think about them early, they might become obstacles or enablers if we get them right down the road, such as, so if we want the norms to become debated, tested, elaborate, almost algorithmic, we need to think about national legislation, potential judicial review, parliamentary debate. So how do they get harnessed and hardened at national level? How to promote that? We need to start thinking about what handshake do norms have with international law. So based on national implementations, how do we frame, how do we actually see our international obligations either changing or clarified? And then turning to something that has mentioned several times, but I think is really challenging, start thinking about really how does the private sector come into this? So essentially think about the life cycle of international cybersecurity incidents, from vulnerability coordination to technical and organizational prevention mitigation measures to national and international enforcement. Where does the private sector, different arms of private sector, just as we have different arms of government, have the strengths that we can harness and put in place? Thank you.
Thanks, Eneken. And yes, I think that's a very good question about that. How do we move, or do we, or how do we move norms from the soft end towards the kind of really holding states accountable and holding stakeholders accountable for actually implementing them, and how do we move up that chain. There's been a really good discussion in the chat, particularly about barriers and obstacles to implementing norms or getting on board with particular norms. I would highlight on that issue that last year in the OEWG, the group agreed to take forward a national survey of implementation, which would provide states with the opportunity to answer particular questions each year or every 2 or 3 years about what they've been doing and why, but also provide data around what they haven't done or where they're finding it difficult and what's stopping them from doing that. And I think that's going to be really important data for researchers, but also in general, but also the community as a whole, are going to be looking at that and seeing if we can unpick some of those issues that states are citing where they found difficulties, and what can the GFCE do about that? Well, I think will be a very, very valid question. We've had a couple of more coming in now about the repository of national programs and initiatives that align with international norms. So this report is a fantastic start, and as good as we have. And I think hopefully we will start to see more of that coming through. And as I just said, through the national survey of implementation, I think will help to draw out some of that. But it's really important. One of the actions that I've taken away from reading this report is actually to socialise it around my own government and with my own partners. Particularly, people will look to the UK and think, oh well, they have quite a developed capacity on cybersecurity, which is true. But there's ideas in here, in other examples that people have worked through that we haven't looked at before, and we need to consider those. So the learning goes both ways. It's not from one side to another. So lots of questions coming in now, trying to keep up with the chat, which is great to see people interacting, and Moliehi has rightly highlighted the UNIDIR cyber policy portals. I think an important tool to be looking at. A very interesting question from Rick about when does the private sector's alignment of business policies with norms become a competitive advantage, and is that possible? I'm not sure I can answer that one. I don't know if any of the panel feel like they've got something to contribute on that one, but it's a very interesting question. Benjamin, do you want to jump in?
I was thinking, because of all the contacts I have in the private sector, that okay, why do the big private sector companies want to get involved in norms creation, like Microsoft, like Siemens? Because they realize that it's actually existential to them, and so maybe it's not even competitive advantage, but in terms of, are they going to be around? If they are actually as large as nation states, they actually need to be good citizens, and they also need the states to have responsible behavior towards them. I think that's where the mutual self-interest is.
Absolutely interesting, Benjamin. And Eneken, you were going to, yes, please.
Yes, I think. Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that is a $1 billion question. Like, can we make cybersecurity profitable? And profitable doesn't necessarily mean that only one company profits, but actually finding this equilibrium that serves government aspirations and is acceptable to shareholders. And that, I think that the hard truth is that we can't expect that the global standard and the private sector standard to follow is the standard of the most advanced information societies or cyber powers. Because, well, many of these organizations operate in environments that are not so advanced, or on average with countries that cannot reach that level. So we have to be mindful in that sense that we have to offer rather concrete lines of discussion, clear expectations to different stakeholders, like private sector stakeholders, and then be patient about them not meeting all of our demands.
Thank you, Eneken. Yes, Helio, and then we'll go to Liga, and then we'll unfortunately have to wrap up. Helio, please.
I'd like to add some thoughts about Rick's questions about being competitive. Well, even for companies, cyber is a team sport. No one can cover all competences in what the cyber demands. So I've been talking to many private sector actors for the last 3 years, and well, competition is about being better than the other. So I guess by corresponding the government actors' needs, and when I say needs, are also developing strong policies and frameworks to help them to evolve their maturity, is also something that the private sector is interested to get into in many countries. So when we're thinking about regulations, eventually we are thinking that these are boundaries to the private sector, but it could also represent opportunities. So I think there are many private actors interested, but they're more trying to figure out the more thick lines on the landscape, to try to understand the boundaries. And we, as government actors, we are designing these lines right now. So that's why this kind of question is very meaningful, in order to make us government actors to draw these lines more quickly and help them to help us as cyber actors in the cyber realm.
Absolutely, try and get that virtuous circle going. Okay, Liga, we have 1 minute. I think, are you able to come on camera, Liga? Can you speak?
Yeah, hi, thanks for letting me say a word. I heard Microsoft, so I decided to raise my hand. Nice to see many of you. Just very quickly, I think that maybe it's not marketable to be in this space of cyber norms, but I think that it's the bare minimum required for corporate responsibility these days. And companies such as mine can sort of afford to devote a lot of resources to it. I don't think that a company that does not get active in cyber norms is necessarily irresponsible, but it really takes a large corporation to show as much effort in this space as Microsoft does. So we also try to pay attention to bring other actors, like smaller actors involved when possible with such our initiatives, such as the Paris Call and so forth, that some of you know very well. But it's not just in cyber. We have to do this on AI, on any new technologies that governments have to think about regulating. So in anything going forward on any emerging technology, we have to consider how we work on this space in the regulatory space, like in Brussels on regular EU digital policy, but also, in a wider sense, what can you do that's not regulated by law to make an impact on the environment?
Thank you. Thank you, Liga. Very insightful as ever. We have just 2 minutes left, so I'm going to have to wrap up. I want to obviously extend our thanks to the authors, Mika and Eneken. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today, and more importantly, for your great contribution on this research, which I think will be really, really useful to lots of people in the community. To our panelists for all of their insights, thank you guys for sharing your views with us. Really, really welcome those. And of course to our audience, who, we wouldn't be doing this if you weren't there, but also for your great engagement in the chat, which I can see everybody's still going there, and so do carry on with that. I think we've kind of been through, why this matters, but I think some of the points raised really emphasize that this is a core foreign policy issue, and this action that we take together is really in supporting political commitments, as Moliehi pointed out, but also in filling domestic gaps. And that's, that feels like some of the core issues that GFCE is here for, bringing together different kinds of implementation across, diverse contexts, but just helping to push forward and keep making progress, whether it's maturity, collaboration, developing, just working together to keep going step by step forwards, drawing on all the resources that we can, whether it's state, whether it's stakeholders, whether it's championing, whether it's funding, all of those different issues. And so I've certainly taken a lot away from this discussion, and really looking forward to getting my colleagues' views on the report now that it's out. So thank you very much to everybody. I hope you've enjoyed our session today, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Have a great day.